Hi, I'm Amy, your friendly internet history lover who is also legally blind. This time I want to talk about an event which happened in the late 18th century and which many people see as the beginning of the proper modern period, the French Revolution. Well, half of it. I stop around the death of Louis XVI, spoiler alert, because there is so much to cover and I can't keep doing this until midnight. So I'm ending this when the monarch ends. Anyway, thanks again to Callan, my tech guy and support worker. Remember, I am not a professional, I am just a uni student who is a history lover. Now, on to the episode. The French Revolution. This is one of those events which had a great impact on not just France but also across Europe. This event overthrew a monarchy which had stood for almost 1,000 years. The revolution was a chaotic time and shows what happens when the oppressed majority realize they are the majority and it is unfair that they are oppressed. This is a very long, complicated topic, so let's see what we can unpack. In the 18th century, France was not in a good place. The society was still clinging onto the remnants of a feudal system which kept the poor starving and the privileged rich. French society could be divided into 3 categories or estates. The first estate were the clergy, the priests, the bishops, the nuns, all the holy people. The second estate were the nobles, the people who thought they were better than everyone and deserved privileges because of their birth. And the third estate was everybody else. This third estate comprised of everyone from merchants to laborers to the emerging bourgeoisie. Sorry, I am barely able to pronounce English, so it's going to be interesting to see how we pronounce French today. Or the citizens of towns, the beginnings of the French middle class. And at the top of this mess of class division was the king. Now, in theory, the king was an absolute monarch, ordained by God himself to reign over the country. However, there were these bodies called the parliaments. One of the most important parliaments was the Parliament of Paris. These were meant as more of an advisory body. The most power they had was to refuse to register any new legislation made by the monarch. The French did not have a regular parliament like Britain. The closest they had was the Estates General, which was a body called by the monarch when they needed serious help. This was rarely done, and even then, the Estates General had their own problems. They were divided into groups of deputies, 300 per estate. Each estate was expected to vote amongst themselves. Can you see the problem? The third estate, which represented around 98% of the French population, only had one vote, the same as the clergy and the nobles. As the episode goes on, we will see the third estate realizing how unfair this is. There are many factors which may have played a significant role in the beginning of the revolution. First of all, France was seriously in debt. They had spent so much money in not 1, not 2, but 3 conflicts during the 18th century. The Austrian War of Succession, the 7 Years' War, which was basically the real First World War, and the American War of Independence, because the French love sticking it to the English. Another factor may be the ideas floating around thanks to the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a time when people began to discuss new ideas of how the world works and who should be governing it. These ideas went against the old idea of an absolute monarch. And then, of course, we cannot forget about the American War of Independence. Many French volunteered to fight for the rebels against the English because, again, the French loved sticking it to the English. And they brought home ideas of liberty, constitution, and power being held by the people. Even some liberal nobles were starting to like these ideas. And then, of course, we cannot forget about the unfair taxing. The third estate had to pay many different taxes, while the first and second estates had exemptions. These privileges did not please the third estate, and all they needed was a voice. And so the king unintentionally gave them a voice. King Louis XVI, yes, there were 16 of them, saw France's financial state and knew he had to do something. In 1787, he called a meeting of notable nobles, meant to advise him. To be fair, Louis did propose the removal of the first and second estates' tax exemptions, but the nobles were having none of that. They claimed that such a decision could not be made unless the king called the Estates General, which had not been done in over 150 years. Eventually, Louis agreed. 1788 was not a good year. Thanks to a bad harvest, the price of bread began to skyrocket. So the people were more than eager to give their complaints to the king. The number of deputies in the Third Estate was even doubled to 600. Now, if they were voting by head, then maybe this would have made a difference. However, when the time came for the Estates General to gather, the king decided that they would go off into separate chambers and vote amongst their own estate. This did not please the Third Estate, but then on the 17th of June, the Third Estate decided that because they represented the majority of the French people, they should speak for the French people, and they had the authority to pass legislation. And so they started doing just that. In that moment, the Third Estate became the National Assembly. This moment would mark the beginning of change in French politics. And the king did not like this change. He saw these people claiming to be the true voice of France and decided this was not on. He literally locked them out of their regular meeting place on the 20th. And so the National Assembly met in a tennis court. A tennis court! Because it was the only place to fit them all. On the 20th of June in the tennis court, the National Assembly swore an oath to form a constitution for France and improve life for the people who for so long had been oppressed. You just got to love these people's determination. Louis was losing control of the situation. He tried to get the National Assembly to disband and claimed any decision they made was mute. But there was no stopping the National Assembly. Even members of the other two estates began to join them. And so, on the 27th of June, Louis wrote to the first and second estates, informing them they were to unite as one body with the National Assembly. After this political victory, the idea of revolution began to spread through the people, especially in Paris. Paris is where the fun really begins. And by fun, I mean absolute chaos. So while all this political drama was going on, the price of bread was still soaring. This, combined with the fear that the National Assembly may face counter-strikes from royal troops, led to many people, especially in Paris, to feel nervous. This culminated on the 14th of July, when, after acquiring weapons and the support of some soldiers from the Paris regiment, and around 8,000 people came to the Bastille, a fortress which had been used as a prison and symbolized the oppressive power of the monarch. And they demanded gunpowder and weapons from the governor, Marquis Bernard René Jourdain de Launay. Again, I cannot pronounce English, let alone French. Then things go downhill. No one knows who fired the first shot, but this led to the death of around 100 of the people and the injury of many more. The crowd ended up storming the Bastille and taking the fortress. This sent shockwaves through the country. It showed just how powerful the people could be. By taking the Bastille, the people of Paris took the fight of the National Assembly and made it their own. This would also be an omen for the violence which was to come. And believe me, this will get violent. In rural areas, peasants began dismantling the system which had held them in servitude to the nobles for centuries. They would storm the homes of the nobility, destroying property, sometimes killing them, but mostly having the nobles release the people from their servitude. This was literally called the fear. Oh, it will get worse for you nobles, just you wait and see. In other news, during August, the National Assembly began forming the blueprint for what would become their new society. On the 26th of August, they enacted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. A mouthful, I know. This document, consisting of 17 articles, detailed a social structure based on liberty, individual right, and a government focused on the people. The National Assembly was on a roll, and as they passed more decrees, the power of the monarch deteriorated. In September, Louis was granted the right to suspended veto, which meant he could suspend any legislation but not completely veto it. Louis was really not into this revolution. He did not like the idea of the Declaration or any of the other decrees, even if he supported them in writing. The National Assembly did not trust Louis, and this distrust turned into suspicion among the people. And then, in October, the people of Paris learnt that a regiment of soldiers was headed to Versailles, the residence of the royal family. They were frightened that the king would try and combat their revolution. It didn't help that bread prices were still rising. So on the 5th of October, a large number of women, yes, women, went to the town hall and demanded the mayor of Paris do something. And then they just ransacked the place, stealing weapons and even cannons. What were they going to do? I will tell you what they did. This gathering of women, accompanied by the National Guard, marched to Versailles and in the middle of the night fought the palace guards. This violence shocked Louis so much, he just decided to go along with their demands. And this was how the royal family and the National Assembly was relocated to Paris, because of an awesome group of women. As a feminist who loves it when women show the various ways of being awesome, this just filled me with such joy. This event, lasting from the 5th to the 6th of October, later called the October days was a significant part of the French Revolution, and it was thanks, for the most part, to women. Okay, feminist tangent over. Moving on. Late 1789 and 1790 were very busy times for the National Assembly. They were forming a constitution. They were trying to fix the financial crisis. They were making reforms. It would take too long to describe everything they did. And to be honest, I am not a legal person, so trying to understand every single law reform is out of my range. But I will discuss one of the more divisive reforms. The National Assembly decided they needed to reform the Church of France, because reforming the church is always a good idea. The good news? Now everyone was equal. Anyone could seek a high position in the church. Before, priests who were born of noble birth were usually more successful than priests who came from more humbler beginnings. But thanks to the Revolution, everything changed. There were more opportunities both inside and outside the church. In fact, they just threw away titles altogether, and everyone was to be called either citizen or citizeness. They promoted religious tolerance and gave more power to French Protestants and French Jews. The bad news? The National Assembly tried to restructure the religious order. Monastic religious orders, excluding ones dedicated to charity and teaching, were abolished. So were religious titles, excluding bishop and priest. And then, on 12th of July, 1790, they created the Constitution of the Clergy, and on 27th of November passed a law requiring all priests to swear an oath of fidelity or be removed from their position. This, of course, angered the Pope. Pope Pius VI openly criticized what was going on in France. He even told the clergy who swore the oath to renounce it, because this was not a part of the true faith. The revolutionaries did not care about what Pius had to say. You know who did care? King Louis. This criticism from the Pope was basically the final straw for Louis. This had been building up for a while. His dislike of the National Assembly and what they were doing to his country, the slow erosion of his power, and now the Pope was angry at them? This was just too much. So, in April of 1791, Louis and his family fled Paris, hoping to reach Austria, where they could hopefully gain support to retake their power. Louis even left a lengthy note to the people of France, basically saying, I don't like what you are doing, but if you accept me as your absolute king, I will embrace you as a loving father. Let's just let that sink in. Anyway, the National Assembly was quickly on the hunt. They literally told the public that the royal family had been kidnapped. The royal family, meanwhile, did not make it to Austria. They did not even leave France. They were apprehended in a town called Rouen and taken back to Paris. And this was basically the beginning of the end for Louis. The National Assembly was split. On one hand, you had the more moderate faction who still wanted a constitutional monarchy. On the other hand, you had the radicals who thought they should go full republic. The flight of King Louis really stirred up trouble in the National Assembly. They were still leaning towards reinstating Louis, despite the fact many of the radicals saw the flight of the king as a betrayal of the oath he had made to the people of France and the constitution which was yet to be made. On 17th of July, the radicals organized a demonstration at the Champ de Mars, protesting against the National Assembly's desire to continue with a constitutional monarchy, and literally presented a petition demanding that Louis not only be dethroned, but tried for treason. The mayor of Paris, Sylvain Bailly, who was among the moderates, had instated martial law forbidding such demonstrations, and the commander of the National Guard, Lafayette, who was also among the moderates, ordered the guard to fire upon the demonstrators. Approximately 60 Parisians were either killed or injured. This only worsened the divide between the two factions. However, this also led to the decline of the moderate leaders and the rise of more radical individuals, such as Robespierre. In September of 1791, the Constitution was finally instated, and soon after France elected the members of the Legislative Assembly, who would now be the governing body of France. However, though Louis seemed to agree with the Constitution, tensions were still high, and many were still afraid of counter-revolutionary attacks. Since the rise of the National Assembly, people had been immigrating out of France, especially nobles. Even the king's two brothers left. This, of course, increased fears of counter-revolutionary movements. And then, of course, there were the other European monarchs. Though they did not interfere directly, the other monarchs of Europe, such as the King of Prussia and the Holy Roman Emperor, who happened to be Marie Antoinette's brother, still showed concern for the goings-on in France and the safety of the royal family. How did the Legislative Assembly react? By declaring war on Austria. They thought this might help them fight against counter-revolutionaries and help spread the good word of the concept of revolution to the rest of Europe. So in April of 1792, France went to war. The war did not go well at all. The French army kept getting defeated. The Austrian-Prussian army was advancing into France, and tensions were rising. Anti-monarchist fears were rising. There were food shortages and chaos in the rural areas. On 11th of July, the Legislative Assembly basically declared, "We are screwed. All hands on deck now!" Suspicions of the king's intentions had been steadily rising since the beginning of the revolution. But now, with Austria and Prussia coming closer, and with the commander of the Austrian-Prussian army literally threatening France if any harm was to come to the royal family, the people were afraid that their new government was in danger. They feared that if they were defeated, then the invading army would reinstate the old absolute style of monarchy. And of course, fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. On the 3rd of August, the Legislative Assembly was petitioned to abolish the monarchy, but they were denied. On the 6th of August, a meeting was called in the Champ de Mars again, demanding the king be removed, and again they refused. Finally, the people took the matter into their own hands, as they have basically been doing this entire time. On the 10th of August, the Tuileries Palace, the residence of the royal family, was attacked. The royal family fled to the Assembly building, and while Louis ordered that the Swiss guard not fire on the crowd, they did not listen, and there were many casualties on both sides. In the end, the royals were arrested. Louis, Marie Antoinette, and their 2 children. Louis's days were numbered. On the 21st of September, the constitutional monarchy was abolished and France became a republic. On the 20th of November, it was declared that an iron chest had been found containing documents which showed Louis had been up to some counter-revolutionary behavior. This was enough to begin the trial. After preparing the list of charges, they were ready to summon Louis to be indicted. When they went to fetch him, as if to add insult to injury, Louis was addressed as Citizen Capet, which infuriated the former king. Louis remained calm through the reading of the charges, except for when he was accused of shedding French blood, when he began to shed tears. This may show that he actually did care in his own way about the people of France. The trials began on the 26th of December. His defense tried really hard, but in the end, on the 15th of January, Louis was declared guilty, and not a single person voted for his innocence. On the 16th of January, voting for the sentencing began. In the end, it was decided that Louis would be executed. Louis probably knew, even at the beginning of his trial, that he would most likely die. According to an online article I read during my research, Louis spent his last Christmas revising his last will and testament, and even wrote to his young son and his wife. He wrote an apology to Marie Antoinette for any pain he caused during their marriage, and wrote to his son asking that instead of seeking revenge for his father's death, he should seek the happiness of his people. That is just such a beautiful thing to say, and may yet again show that Louis did care for France in his own way. And then he signed his letter as Louis XVI of France and Navarre, which is just such an awesome middle finger to his accusers. On the 20th of January, Louis was allowed to say goodbye to his family. Apparently his children clung to his legs while he wept, and Marie Antoinette had tears in her eyes. This is just a reminder that even though they were controversial figures, they were still human, and they were still a family. On the 21st of January, 1793, Louis, formerly the King of France, was executed via guillotine. I am going to stop there. Well, I would love to get into the madness, which was the terror. This episode is already going to be long enough, and I may save it for later on. So just some final thoughts. The French Revolution was the culmination of decades, if not centuries, of inequality. It was the result of an old style of social structure clashing with new ideas of liberty and equality. It was a turning point in European history. The French Revolution shows what violence can happen when a people are oppressed for so long. Fear, suspicion, and political tension spread like wildfire. It just goes to show how powerful and how dangerous we can be when pushed down for long enough. This event shows that we, humanity, often react to fear with extreme violence. Yes, I agree that France's free revolution needed to change. Do I believe there may have been a less violent way which did not result in hundreds of deaths and the execution of Louis XVI? Maybe. To be honest, I don't know. Maybe it was inevitable. While Louis may have truly wanted to help France, he was also too set in his ideology of absolute monarchy. And to be honest, France was already primed for explosion. It was only a matter of time before something broke. Well, thanks for listening. If I made any mistakes, please let us have a calm discussion in the comment section. The comment section is for civil conversation. No one is to be guillotined.